everyone. I hope you are all doing well. I am Novi Iman from the Department of Management, Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you at the Universitas Gadjah Mada. I wish I could welcome you in person, but because of the pandemic, unfortunately, we have to do everything online like this. So today I want to share with you a topic on sustainable management. I will be talking about Indonesia's experience and strategies in dealing with sustainable management, which I hope will be interesting and relevant for you. Before we begin, let me explain briefly about the content of my presentation. There will be two main parts of my presentation. The first one is about a general idea on sustainability and environmental management, while the second one is more specific about the case of Indonesia in dealing with sustainable development goals. So let's get stuck in. First of all, what is sustainability? Sustainability is about meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Those are the definitions provided by the Brundtland Commission. If we take a look at that definition very carefully, then we have to consider three different time zones. The first one, we have to deal with historical liabilities from times when it was acceptable to externalize part of their costs onto the environment, to the people, or to future generations. Secondly, we have to meet the increased expectation of today's citizens and consumers. And finally, we have to take into account the interests and rights of future generation. So essentially, we have to think about three different time zones. What happened in the past, what happened at this moment, and what will happen in the future. Furthermore, we also have to think about three different themes: demographic change, ecosystem change, and climate change. Demographic change is essentially about shifts in size and patterns of population over time, including the distribution of wealth and poverty in our society. Ecosystem change is about variations over time in the Earth's natural capital, affecting the planet's ability to sustain future generations. And climate change is about changes in the Earth's climate over time because of the natural variability and human activity. If we look at demographic change carefully, we have to acknowledge that our population has gone from 2.5 billion in 1950s to 7.6 billion at this moment. It means that the number has increased more than 3 times within 70 years. Secondly, we also have to acknowledge that there are 76 million new inhabitants are added every year because births outnumber deaths with the ratio of more than 2:1. Third, we have to acknowledge that there are 3 billion people living on less than $2 a day. 3 billion people means half of the world's population. And we have to acknowledge that nearly half of the world's population is under 25. This growing population will be much more significant in the least developed countries. And in the emerging economies, population of elderly people will be increasing significantly, especially in China and India. Moreover, if we look at the ecosystem change, we have to acknowledge that the rising greenhouse gas emissions is everywhere. Overexploitation of many surface and groundwater resources is also risking our life. There are also continuing threats to biodiversity, particularly associated with habitat destruction and invasive species. We also have to acknowledge that there are intense exploitation and depletion of wild fish stocks. There are also fragmentation of many forest ecosystems, particularly in tropical countries like Indonesia. There are increasing air pollution, especially in urban areas on developing countries, and we have to be aware of increasing toxic chemicals in infants and also in the natural environment. Now, when we look at climate change, we have to realize that greenhouse gases have reached unprecedented levels. Carbon dioxide is found at higher levels in the atmosphere than at any time in the last 650,000 years. This rising number is essential to explain the global warming seen in the past few decades. This increasing number of greenhouse gases can only be explained with reference to human activity indeed. And if we fail to mitigate climate change as an immediate priority, would cost the economy at least 5% up to 20% of our GDP. But we know that climate change can be very difficult to a portion of our society. For example, there are some people that believe that the science is faulty. Some people believe that human activity is not the cause of climate change. Some people even believe that climate change is a hoax. Some people acknowledge that climate change is real, but we are not in a position to predict what will happen in the future. Some people believe that climate change is real, but we are not in a position to predict what will happen in the future. And some people also believe that adaptation is better than mitigation. So those kind of risks will be main challenges when we want to solve this problem. Now, we need to think about capital. We have our Earth as our natural capital, but inside our Earth, we also have our social capital and our human capital. Social capital is more like a cumulative capital among different people, different societies, and things like that. Human capital is more about individual capital. And other than that, we have to think about manufactured capital like technology, knowledge, capabilities, and things like that, as well as financial capital. We need those kind of capital to solve this sustainability problem. According to my research, there are at least 3 different initiatives and examples in solving this kind of problem. The first one is the initiative in the private sector. The second one is the initiatives in the public sector. And the third one is the initiatives in the non-profit sector, like in civil society, in NGOs, in local community, and so on and so forth. Initiative in the private sector usually tend to be very opportunistic. The challenge is that those kind of activities are voluntarily. It means that if you are not complying with this kind of regulation, usually there will be no serious punishment, especially in developing countries. Initiatives in the private sector, for example, are Tesla electric cars, Philips lighting service, car sharing in Montreal, and so on and so forth. Secondly, initiatives in the public sector. This kind of thing can be broad, this kind of thing can be grand and usually rhetoric. And the problem with this kind of initiatives is that it will lack of coordination. Some example of this kind of initiatives are Paris Agreement, carbon taxes, and then forest in Bhutan, fuel standards for automobiles, and so on and so forth. Finally, initiatives in the non-profit sector. This kind of thing can be quite effective, but the initiative is very small. The initiative is sporadic and tend to be very local. That's why this kind of initiatives requires collectivity to organize everything all together to solve the sustainability problem. Some example of these initiatives are Green Building Certification Program, and then Wind Power in Denmark, Sierra Club Beyond Coal campaign, and so on and so forth. Now, sustainability management will also involve three different actors: the public sector, private sector, and non-profit sector. Those three actors will have three different strategic choices. The public sector will be focusing on orchestrated planning. Private sector will be focusing on autonomous venturing, while non-profit sector will be focusing on grounded engagement. The instruments for public sectors are laws, regulations, decrees, incentives, and so on and so forth. The instruments for private sectors are products, services, infrastructures, while the instruments for non-profit sectors are collective action based on communality. Now, if we move on to the philosophical side of sustainability management, then we have to deal with moral values. There are at least two different values here. The first one is relativism, and the second one is pluralism. Relativism is about acknowledging that values are different, that values are relative to cultures, to times, to place, to individuals, to societies, and so on and so forth. While pluralism essentially said that there is no single moral theory, there is no single principle that should be accepted as preferable to others. There are different, diverse, and even mutually inconsistent ethical positions that should be recognized. One thing can be ethical for me, but will not be ethical for you, and vice versa. And there is not necessarily any single moral principle or set of principles that everyone should accept. These two moral values will make sustainability management even more challenging and difficult. Nevertheless, we know that if we want to pursue sustainability, it will come with many benefits. For example, we can reduce our energy, we can reduce our waste, we can reduce our costs, we can differentiate ourselves, we can differentiate our organization from the rest. We can also sidestep future regulations. We can create innovative products, innovative process, new services. We can also open up new markets and provide competitive advantage. We can also attract and retain the best employees, especially young millennials, Generation Z, and things like that are more concerned with this kind of issues. We can also improve our image with shareholders and the public. We can reduce legal risk and insurance costs, and we can also provide a higher quality of life. Those are at least the benefits of pursuing sustainability. But then, if we decide not to pursue sustainability, there will be some risks and problems that comes with it. For example, we have to be liable for pollutants, and this kind of liability is beginning to extend beyond the factory gates. We have to think about supply problems with raw materials and energy. We have to anticipate that there will be attacks on our organizational image. There will be legal risk as well, because something that legal at the time can be determined to be harmful in the future. There is also risk of bad-mouthing our product, and in some cases, there is also risk of being closed out of certain markets. For example, in Indonesia, if you want to export CPO, you have to comply with certain certification. Otherwise, you cannot export your product everywhere. Even though we want to pursue sustainability, there will also be several risks involved in that. The first one is what we call greenwashing. Greenwashing is publicly tout our sustainability efforts without much action to back them up. The second risk is that it will cannibalize our own business. We will risk making our products and services obsolete. And the third risk is raising unrealistic expectations because no matter how much we do, we will always be able to find someone who thinks that we should do more. Because of that challenges, problems, and risks involved in sustainability management, then we have to think sustainability as a strategic issue. We have to realize that there is a transformation in worldwide trends. We also have to acknowledge that there is a Walmart effect where big companies putting pressure on their first-tier suppliers. And then we have to understand that sustainability is a natural extension of other organizational changes. And the natural resources are now a limiting factor, and environmental issues are becoming global. Moreover, health concerns are rising. We are facing risks like carcinogens, changing hormones, abnormalities, even COVID-19, and things like that. Social, environmental, and economic factors are also entangling and creating instability everywhere. Energy supplies are also a significant threat for us because of the lack of production, limiting gas sources, and things like that. But these kind of problems are also uncovering new opportunities like organic agriculture, green building, urban cities, socially responsible investing, and so on and so forth. And because of that, sustainability tends to produce multiple unintended benefits like reduced absenteeism, improved productivity, increased employee satisfaction, and so on and so forth. So because of those kind of things, then we have to put sustainable management as a strategic issue in our organization. So if we want to define sustainable management, especially in the context of business, we have to take into account three different factors. Factors for a healthy environment, factors for a healthy economy, and factors for a healthy society. And those three different factors have to come together as a whole. For example, factors of a healthy economy, we have to deal with multiple buyers and sellers. We have to consider timely and accurate information. We have to comply with accounting standards and enforcement. We have to make sure that there will be absence of governmental corruption. We have to consider about markets for financing development. We have to pay attention with agreed upon method or currency of exchange, and we also have to consider about the absence of deflation or high inflation. As for factors for a healthy society, we have to think about subsistence, we have to think about protection and security, we have to think about affection, we have to think about understanding, participation, leisure, creation, identity, meaning, freedom, and so on and so forth. And this kind of things will rely on a strong education system, a robust middle class, the absence of a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and then access to healthcare, security and the absence of crime, and equal rights and the absence of discrimination. While for the factors for a healthy environment, we have to know that nature must not be subjected to increasing concentration from substance from the Earth's crust. Like main raw materials we extract from deep inside the Earth, like fossil fuels, metals, and minerals. And then we must not allow man-made substance to build up in nature, because humans make over 100,000 synthetic chemicals, molecules nature that are never made before. And we must not continue to destroy the productive capacity of nature to provide the services upon which we depend. This is very important because forests will be habitat for endangered species. to provide clean water and air, and to protect our soil. And barrier reef, for example, will be habitat for marine life. And we have to be very careful with over-harvesting, with development, and also genetic manipulation, because those kind of things will contribute to this problem. And the next question is, how do you know whether your organization is sustainable? In the context of operation management, we have our inputs, we have our process or activities, we also have our outputs. When we think about our process, we have to consider the energy that we are using. We have to consider the influence of others in our supply chain. And finally, we also have to consider about the products or services that we are going to provide to our customers. And when we are talking about this kind of activities, we have to think about our materials, whether the materials comes from sustainable sources. We have to consider our community. We have to make sure that our activities will contribute to solving the local community's problems. And finally, in the outputs, we have to make sure that our waste is zero or very close to zero. And if we look at the sustainability management more closely, then this kind of activities can be divided into many different divisions or many different parts of the organization. For example, in the accounting division, we have to build our system. We have to establish our sustainability targets. We have to provide sustainability information to influence decision making. In the marketing division, for example, we can design and promote our products to be more sustainable. We can provide sustainable options and inspire changes to our customers. In the field of operation, for example, we can take more responsibility for all the impacts, both social and environmental, across the life cycle of our products and services. In the finance division, for example, we can send signals to our stakeholders that we can help them to invest in longer-term opportunities, that we can make sure that our activities are responsible and that we are effectively manage our economic, our environmental, and social impact. As with everything that happens in the organization, promoting sustainable management like this can be very difficult. The most significant challenge is that when we have to influence something without authority, and the second challenge is that how to get the ear and respect of management. And also we have to pay attention about the risk of burnout, that we cannot work on everything at once. And finally, we have to make sure that we involve everyone in the organization, because we will more likely to see exasperation rather than excitement. Those are the most common hurdles when we are going to implement sustainability management in our organization. When we are facing a situation where change agents have no formal authority, we can begin with very minimum span of control. We can use sow seeds to develop our advocates to support the idea of sustainability. We can also initiate discussion groups and green teams. And when we are having a situation where sustainability coordinators are having formal authority, then we can initiate steering committees. We can also establish task forces and project teams. We can also assign several individuals. We can give award programs and certification systems. And also, we can implement sustainability management system like ISO 9000 or ISO 14000. This kind of certification are very popular in Indonesia. But other than that, we can also use different strategies, like we can begin to clean up our own operation. We have to make sure that our facilities, our technology, our resources, and things like that are having minimum waste. We can try to eliminate disposable. We can also purchase from fair trade and things like that. Secondly, we can also manage our ripple effect because business largest impact usually comes not from its own operation, but from its impact on others. In economics, we call this as externalities. And then we can also evaluate the strategic threats to our organization. For example, the spread of disease, the increasing risk of property damage, the reduced life expectancy, the legal risk, the shareholder resolution, and things like that. And finally, we can also explore emerging opportunities. Because the consumer economy is having about 1 billion people, the emerging markets is currently about 2 billion people, and the survival economy is about 3 billion people. And finally, this is getting more and more popular nowadays, is the importance of sustainability reporting, because organizations, private or public, of different size, including NGOs, schools, small business, and things like that, are choosing to report on their sustainability strategies for several reasons. For example, there are increasing understanding of risks and opportunities in short-term and long-term, as well as in financial performance and non-financial performance. Also, they realize that benchmarking and assessing sustainability performance is getting more and more important nowadays. They also realize that they can use sustainability reporting to compare their performance internally and between organizations and sector externally. They also realize that being transparent and improving reputation as well as brand loyalty by enabling stakeholders can be beneficial for their organization. And finally, they want to demonstrate how the organization influenced and is influenced by sustainability movement. But again, even though sustainability reporting remains a largely voluntary exercise in most countries, including in Indonesia, it is now increasing in popularity. So that concludes the first part of my presentation. I hope this kind of information could give you a kind of general idea on sustainability management, especially for those who are not familiar with this concept yet. Let's take a break for a moment, and then we can move on to the second part of my presentation. Before we move on to the case of Indonesia, I'm sure you are familiar with 3P: people, planet, and profit. These are the basic sustainability's triple bottom line. In people, we are dealing with community, education, equity, social resources, health, well-being, and things like that. In planet, we have to deal with environmental variables like water, air quality, energy conservation, and so on and so forth. With profit, we have to deal with the bottom line and our cash flow. Those are the traditional 3Ps. But then everything has changed. Previously, we are focusing on Millennium Development Goals, but now we are moving to the Sustainable Development Goals. Previously, we have to deal with only 3Ps, but now we have 5Ps. We have to deal with people, we have to deal with planet, but also we have to deal with peace, partnership, and prosperity. So there are 5 values that will be described into 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are 17 targets we must meet by 2030 to ensure decent lives for all on a healthy planet. Right now, it's expected we will fail. One reason for that is the growth in our global population. The more people there are, the more we take from nature. More land for housing, infrastructure, and producing food. More water, more trees. More of us means more pollution and the climate emissions that threaten us all. Our numbers are driving a sixth mass extinction, with 1 million species at risk of disappearing for good. Everyone deserves a long, healthy life, but when governments are poor, health systems buckle under the pressure of growing populations. Meanwhile, women and children are dying because of barriers to family planning, and millions of women and girls still have no say over what happens to their bodies and lives. There is enough of everything for everyone on our planet now, if the richest nations take less and share more. But with our population expected to reach almost 11 billion by the end of the century, abolishing poverty and hunger, and providing food, safe water and energy for all without destroying more of the living world will become impossible. Just as all these problems are linked, so are the solutions. When women and communities are empowered and given the best education, they usually choose smaller families. That helps people escape poverty while taking pressure off resources and the environment. Good healthcare and economic security free people from the need to have many children to support them. And access to modern contraception means that they can choose to have fewer. In rich countries where our impact is so excessively high, we can make a critical difference by having smaller families alongside reducing our runaway consumption. Achieving a sustainable global population matters. If we do, we can all have the dignity, security, and well-being envisioned by the Sustainable Development Goals. We must not fail. Let's invest in and celebrate solutions that empower people to choose smaller families, make their lives better, and protect our only home. Today, tomorrow, and forever. Visit populationmatters.org/SDGs to find out what you can do.
So, what are SDGs? SDGs are the major outcome of Rio +20 Sustainable Development Conference back in 2012. SDGs are universal, limited in number, but aspirational, easy to communicate in addressing the three dimensions of sustainable development in a holistic manner. Remember the 3 P's that I explained just a minute ago. And then there are a shift towards sustainable human development with an universal agenda. We want to address the challenges and opportunities for humankind in the 21st century by leaving nobody behind. We want to address transformative drivers of a particular theme, and we want to have the goals that will enable every country in this world to better target and monitor progress. So these are those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, from no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduce inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institution, and finally, partnership for the goals. So those are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we are having today. But why SDGs are so important? The government of Indonesia believes that global development agenda has to be more focused. We believe that SDGs can be a guidance for global and national sustainable development. We can use SDGs to mobilize our resources, both at national levels and at global levels. And Indonesia, as one of the biggest countries in the world, want to contribute to the development agenda. The government of Indonesia has developed a particular website just for promoting SDGs in Indonesia. The website is www.sdgsindonesia.org.id. Even though the language is Indonesia, but I believe there is also a version in English with lots of data, publication, and things like that.
Selamat datang di Dashboard SDGs Indonesia. Video ini akan memandu Anda untuk menjelajahi fitur-fitur di dalam dashboard. Di halaman utama ini, Anda bisa memilih fitur-fitur tertentu dan bahasa yang akan digunakan. Mari kita mulai dengan klik tombol Visit SDGs Dashboard. Pada panel menu sebelah kiri, terdapat daftar indikator-indikator SDGs dengan kategori tertentu. Anda bisa memilih salah satunya untuk melihat data terkait indikator tersebut. Pewarnaan peta akan berubah sesuai dengan warna goal indikator SDGs yang Anda pilih. Gradasi peta menunjukkan distribusi data SDGs di tingkat subnasional. Di sisi kanan bawah peta, terdapat tombol untuk mengganti tahun publikasi data yang akan otomatis mengubah tampilan peta. Anda bisa memilih tahun maupun klik tombol play untuk menunjukkan animasi perubahan data. Klik Reset Map untuk mengembalikan tampilan peta ke posisi awal. Di sisi kiri bawah peta, Anda bisa memilih sumber data yang diinginkan dan juga memilih untuk menampilkan data hanya dengan ambang tertentu. Klik Reset Map dan peta akan kembali ke tampilan awal. Klik tombol Graph untuk menampilkan grafik batang. Pada grafik tersebut, terdapat fungsi untuk menyembunyikan label. Klik tombol Trend untuk menunjukkan tren data berdasarkan tahun publikasi dalam berbagai bentuk visualisasi. Anda juga bisa membandingkan lokasi dan indikator yang berbeda dalam satu frame yang sama. Di bagian atas dari panel menu sebelah kiri, Anda bisa mengakses fitur pohon indikator yang dapat menampilkan program prioritas pemerintah dan indikator-indikator yang memiliki kontribusi terhadap program tersebut. Kemudian, terdapat tombol SDGs Gap Analysis untuk menampilkan data capaian indikator terhadap target SDGs di tingkat nasional dan subnasional. Akses bantuan ada di kanan atas grafik ini untuk penjelasan lebih lanjut. Untuk mengunduh data, klik tombol Export Map di bagian kanan atas. Anda bisa mengunduh data dalam bentuk PDF, Excel, maupun PowerPoint dan menentukan sumber data maupun indikator yang Anda inginkan. Untuk kembali ke halaman awal, klik tombol Home. Terima kasih. Selamat menggunakan Dashboard SDGs Indonesia untuk mendukung perencanaan kebijakan di tingkat nasional dan subnasional.
There is also channels on YouTube that are promoting SDGs in Indonesia. The channel is called SDGs Indonesia. That comes with lots of videos on SDGs activities, discussion with different stakeholders, as well as promotional materials to encourage the implementation of SDGs in the country. But then we know that the process of SDGs itself is not easy. Before we have our 17 agendas, we had 13 thematic discussion. And Indonesia, along with the United Kingdom and Liberia, has involved in high-level panel on post-2015 development agenda. And Indonesia is also involved in Sustainable Development Goals Open Working Group. These are a kind of working group with more than 70 countries. And then during the period of 2013 to 2014, there are lots of stock-taking sessions, followed by negotiation session and informal sessions. And then in July 2014, they came up with 17 goals and 169 targets. And then in September 2015, at the United Nations Special Summit, the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals is officially launched. So these are the process of the establishment of SDGs. We know that we came up with different activities from Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, high-level panel of eminent person in 2013, and then United Nations General Assembly ratifies Rio Plus 20 outcomes, followed by United Nations Open Working Group meetings between 2013 to 2014, and then followed by high-level political forum in 2013, 2014, and then United Nations General Assembly received zero draft as a result from Open Working Group on SDGs in September, followed by intergovernmental negotiation in January to August, and then in September 2015, the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals has become official. The document itself that were being introduced in 2015 UN Summit is entitled Transforming Our World by 2030, a new agenda for global action. And this document consists of the declaration, the Sustainable Development Goals and the targets, means of implementation and the global partnership, and then follow-up and review. So there are 4 different parts in that particular document. As you can see here, the process of SDGs itself was quite complicated because it involves the United Nations General Assembly, it involves the Open Working Group on SDGs, it also involves the Financing Committee, Economic and Social Council, and then it involves the civil society as well as different countries, different cities and regions. That's why implementing SDGs is not only difficult but also complex and multi-layered. Now let's move on to Indonesia. Indonesia is having 17,504 islands, covering an area of 1,910,931 kilometers. In Indonesia, the issues are very complex because we are having global issues like global warming itself, and then globalization of services and industries. We also having an issues on climate change, especially the involvement of industries and government to encourage sustainable development. And also we have an interest in implementation of green building and architecture. There are also several regulations on green building, on waste management and things like that. But those kind of things are very diverse and widespread. For example, the government has a regulation on green building. There are several measurements during the programming, planning, construction, operation and demolition of a building. And there will be an assessment for each particular stages. From the planning stage to the construction stage to the operation stage, there are several standards, there are several targets and measurements to make sure that everything is complied with the regulation on green building. After the assessment has been completed, then the building will be categorized into different classes. And the building itself will be assessed according to the energy efficiency and refrigerant, indoor air health and comfort, appropriate site development, material resources and cycle, as well as water conservation. Those kind of things has to comply with building environment management. The Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Indonesia is also having their own performance rating program called PROPER. So PROPER is an environmental management performance assessment of a company that requires measurable indicators. These indicators is implemented by the Ministry of Environment with the aim of increasing the role of companies in environmental management, while at the same time creating a stimulant effect in compliance with the environmental regulation and adding value to natural resource maintenance, energy conservation, and community development. The Ministry of Environment has implemented this program since 1990s. And this particular program is designed to encourage company compliance in environmental management through incentive and disincentive instruments. Basically, in this certification program, the company will be classified into 5 different categories. If you got a black color, it means that your company is not in compliance with the standard. Also, if you've got the red color, your company is also not in compliance standard. But the difference is that in the black color, business activities are intentionally committed to ignore the standards provided by the Ministry of Environment. If you've got the blue color, it means that your company is in compliance. If you've got green color, it means that you are beyond compliance. And if you've got the gold color, it means that your company is beyond compliance and you have consistently demonstrated environmental excellence. At this moment, there are 2 companies with black colors, 241 companies with red colors, 1,454 companies in blue colors, 155 companies in green colors, and only 20 companies in gold colors. These are the 7 main standards for proper. So you will be assessed by the efficiency of your energy use. You will be assessed by the way you reduce your greenhouse gas emission. You have to be able to reduce your waste. You have to be able to reduce your pollution. You have to be able to reduce your emission. And you have to prove that you are using your water efficiently. So, what are the challenges in implementing SDGs in Indonesia? Even though we have green building certification, even though we have proper standard in business activities and things like that, implementing SDGs in Indonesia is not easy because we have to integrate SDGs with Indonesian development agenda. And this is very challenging because we have to balance between national agenda and regional agenda. We have to align the presidential vision and mission as well as regional leaders' vision and mission. And also we have to align between national budget and regional budget. Without those kind of alignment, then the implementation of SDGs will be very difficult and challenging. Another challenge is on the measurement of targets and activities. Because we have 17 different agendas, we have lots of measurement targets. We have to make sure that we are measuring the right things. For example, when we are talking about income, when we are talking about well-being, usually we are focusing on average. We are neglecting the inequalities between groups. Maybe we have data on inequalities between top and bottom performers, but at this moment we don't have a particular standard to measure deprivation in our society. Another example, when we are talking about capital, we always think about stocks, we always think about risk and things like that, but we haven't measured our flows very carefully. We haven't measured our resilience very carefully, especially during the time of COVID-19 like this. With regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs has recently published a report on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic towards the achievement of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Especially on goal number 17, goal number 1, goal number 2, goal number 3, goal number 4, goal number 10, goal number 7, goal number 8, goal number 11, goal number 13, goal number 16, as well as goal number 5 and goal number 6. But again, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia is becoming much more significant. If you take a look at this figure, you know that COVID-19 pandemic will impact SDGs number 1 on no poverty, SDG number 2 on zero hunger, SDG number 4 on quality education, SDG number 5 on gender equality, SDG number 8 on decent work and economic growth, and SDGs number 13 on climate action. There are also the impact of COVID-19 on SDGs number 3 on good health and well-being, SDGs number 6 on clean water and solution, SDGs number 9 on industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDGs number 11 on sustainable cities and communities, as well as SDGs number 15 on life on land. Earlier this year, the government of Indonesia has published the Voluntary National Review of 2021. This is a summary of activities on the way in which we attempt to solve this COVID-19 pandemic, especially in relation to 17 goals of SDGs. As you can see from this particular figure, the focus is on SDG number 8 on decent work and economic growth, SDGs number 12 on responsible consumption and production, SDGs number 13 on climate action, SDGs number 2 on zero hunger, SDGs number 3 on good health and well-being, SDGs number 1 on no poverty, and SDGs number 10 on reduce inequalities. But again, those 7 SDGs have to comply with SDGs number 16 on peace, justice, and strong institution, as well as SDGs number 17 on partnership for the goals, because goal number 16 will be the enabler and goal number 17 will affect the implementation of the rest of the SDGs. And SDGs number 8 and 12 will be focusing on industry recovery, tourism and investment towards green economy. SDGs number 13 will be focusing on disaster resilience system. SDGs number 2 and 3 will be focusing on national health system, and SDGs number 1 and 10 will be contributing to the social protection system. So this is the framework that the government of Indonesia is currently using, especially to solve the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to the achievement of the 2030 agenda.
The SDGs drive Indonesia's transition to a green and inclusive economy, protecting mega biodiversity and cementing its status as the lungs of the world. Despite the global pandemic, Indonesia remains deeply committed to meeting the SDGs.
Namun, tantangan ini tidak boleh menyurutkan semangat kita dan tidak boleh menurunkan target SDGs kita.
Part of Indonesia's commitment to the SDG is the inclusive process of the VNR formulation, which is reviewed by the Audit Board. The COVID pandemic has caused setbacks on SDG targets in social and disaster resilience, health and economy. From 2015, poverty was on a decline, shrinking to 9.22% in 2019. But the global setbacks led to a reverse in the trend, and poverty rose to 10.19% in 2020. The urban poor bear the biggest brunt of the pandemic. Child poverty is also on the rise. There has been a progress in reducing inequality, but the pandemic has reversed the gains. Government spending on social protection has reached historic levels following the expansion of coverage. At the same time, infrastructure works on major projects continue taking place. The pandemic is putting pressure on the health system, but Indonesia presses on with a massive vaccination drive, making it the 10th most vaccinated country in the world. Health security coverage expanded to 82.51% of population in 2020. Indonesia is making a headway on undernourishment, but 2020 saw a setback. Some economic indicators have been put under pressure. Economic growth, unemployment rate, and the informal economy grew to 60.47%. On a positive note, GHG emissions have been cut over the past 5 years. Around $3.8 billion has been allocated to boost low-carbon development activities. At least 100 companies released sustainability reports in 2020, almost double the number of reports launched in 2016. Freedom of press has also improved. More Indonesians acquire legal identity earlier, giving them access to basic services. The number of Indonesia's internet users has grown to 73.7% of the total population. We must keep moving and innovating, and everyone must be part of the solutions, with no one left behind.
So, what can we learn from the case of Indonesia? We know that SDGs are broad, SDGs are holistic, comprehensive, but also complex and interdependent between one agenda with other agendas. We know that if we want to make sure we achieve the 2030 agenda, we have to work together. We have to make sure that there is a coordination, there is good communication, and there is a alignment between national agenda as well as regional agenda. In a country like Indonesia, with a very high number of population, with a huge area and many islands, making things work can be very difficult. Making things work can be very challenging. Without strong leadership, without strong institution, it will be very difficult for a country like Indonesia to achieve 2030 agenda. And finally, if we come back to the first part of my presentation, we have to make sure that every aspect, every actor have to work together. Not only the government or the public sector, but also the private sector as well as the non-public sector like civil society, local communities, religious groups, and things like that. Without those actors working together, it can be very difficult to achieve 2030 agenda. So, thank you for joining me until the end of my presentation. I hope you find this presentation useful and possibly giving you insight on sustainable management in general and the dynamics of SDGs implementation in Indonesia in particular. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments, please feel free to write down your questions here, or you can email me at novi.iman@ugm.ac.id.